That night, in the dim light of a dining room bathed in the soft glow of candles, my mother stepped forward with determination. She placed her hand on the will, and without breaking eye contact, announced in a cold voice, "You won't have a penny." I nodded with a bitter smile and, mimicking her coldness, replied, "Then you can't expect anything from me either." With a deliberate gesture, I placed my fork and knife on the table and stood up, allowing a tense silence to settle in the room. Weeks later, a new nightmare erupted in my life. During what was supposed to be a family dinner, Liam leaned forward, his arrogant voice filling the room. "We wanted you to know from the beginning, to avoid misunderstandings later. Everything belongs to us." The impact of those words felt like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the homemade lasagna Mom had so carefully prepared to welcome me back became an unbearable weight, laden with memories and broken promises. For a moment, the dining room fell into absolute silence, broken only by the distant murmur of traffic beyond the neighborhood. My heart racing, my eyes fell on Laiina, seated at the other end of the elegant cherrywood table, while the younger twins, with ambiguous smiles and eyes filled with a disturbing self-assurance, simply watched. With a trembling, barely controlled voice, I tried to ask, "What do you mean by all this?" At that precise moment, Mom interrupted. Her smile vanished, replaced by a determined and defiant expression, and she declared, "Your father and I have decided to change our will, and we wanted you to hear it firsthand. The house, the cabin by the lake, everything has been left to Lee." I turned to Dad, searching for any sign of doubt or indication that this was a cruel joke, but his gaze was lost in the reflections of the silverware, avoiding mine. After a silence that seemed to last forever, he explained in a low, measured voice, "Sarah, you must understand our reasoning. You've accomplished incredible things, and your mother and I are proud of the career and success you've built." Liam added coldly, "Liana and Emiliana are still finding their way. They need more support." Mom's response came quickly, laced with theatrical resignation. "This is precisely why we preferred not to tell you anything. You always reduce everything to money, Sarah. For us, family comes first." A burning heat spread through my cheeks, and I clenched my fist, hidden under the tablecloth. With a trembling voice, I replied, "For me, family has always been the most important thing. Every sacrifice I made was out of love and the duty to keep us together, as you yourself insisted." Liam, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms with a smug smirk, retorted sarcastically, "You're playing the martyr. Nobody forced you to help, you just relished the role of heroine." Liana let out a low laugh, toying with a strand of her hair, and with an amused look, she hinted, "Did you really think that by throwing money at us indiscriminately, Mom and Dad would love you the same way they love us?" The cruelty of their words reopened a wound I thought I'd buried years ago. My parents, motionless and silent, offered no defense. Their stillness spoke louder than any reproach. They had always protected and justified Lee's every reckless act, while I, after years of sacrifice, was branded greedy and selfish. Rage ignited within me, consuming the last vestiges of patience. In a strained but resolute voice, I asserted, "You're right, Liam. No one forced me to be this family's constant support, but from today on, I won't let them make me feel guilty about it." With a decisive movement, I pushed my chair back and stood abruptly, ignoring the surprised and bewildered looks. For a brief moment, the aroma of marinara sauce filled the air, cruelly reminding me of what I had hoped would be a comforting family evening. Instead, I encountered the emotional ambush in the house I myself had helped to maintain. I grabbed my coat in the hallway, and as I stepped through the front door, it slammed shut behind me, cutting me off from those voices that no longer had a place in my life. Outside, the fresh Portland air hit me hard, momentarily clearing my mind, though my heart still ached from the betrayal. That family, whom I had trusted, had used me, discarded me, and left me alone in their contempt. I got into my car, slammed the door, and with trembling hands on the steering wheel, let the tears flow freely. On the silent drive back to my downtown apartment, the memories flooded back. Every financial sacrifice, every canceled vacation, every sleepless night spent crunching numbers and bills. It all piled up in my mind, as if the weight of my dedication had become a curse. Back home, my apartment felt strangely alien, as if every corner were permeated by the bitter revelation of that night. I poured myself a generous glass of Cabernet, that expensive wine I had reserved for special occasions, and with each sip I found a bitter lesson. Settling onto the sofa, I opened my banking app. $800 a month earmarked for my parents' mortgage, and another $600 for utilities, flashed across the screen, mocking my sacrifice. Without a second thought, I canceled both payments. A silent act of rebellion, reflected in the confirmations that flickered before my eyes. As the night faded, I obsessively replayed every word of that dinner. The anger transformed, giving way to a profound sadness. It wasn't just a financial rejection, but a denial of my worth. A lifetime of feeling relegated to the background, confirmed by family disdain. However, amidst so much pain, something new began to take shape within me. A sense of liberation emerged, and I understood that my worth did not depend on their approval. It was time to reclaim my life, to break the chains of expectations and obligations that had imprisoned my spirit for so long. I knew very well that my parents and Liana wouldn't let this go unpunished. Inevitable phone calls, arguments, perhaps even reprisals, were on the horizon. But that night marked a turning point. With determination burning in my eyes, I promised myself I would no longer be the victim, I would no longer accept contempt disguised as family duty. From then on, my life would be my own. As I drained the last drop of wine, a bitter smile appeared in the darkness. My family had decided to give their inheritance to Liana. But that night they had granted me something far more valuable, the freedom to be myself. Sleep eluded me in the middle of the night. Staring at the gloomy ceiling of my apartment, my mind fluttered between disbelief, pain, and anger. The city lights flickered through the curtains, indifferent to the inner turmoil that consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived those humiliating moments at the dinner table, the IEM's arrogance, Liana's mocking disdain, and above all, my parents' cutting silence. A silence that hurt more than any words. With dawn, exhaustion left me without strength or tears. I got up slowly. I made a strong coffee and, sitting down, contemplated the new day with a mixture of melancholy and determination, aware that, at last, I had reclaimed my right to live for myself. With the soft light of dawn filtering through the kitchen window, I found myself absorbed in my thoughts, while the distant murmur of the news faded into the background, the memories as intense and clear as if projected onto every corner. They made me question whether my blindness had been involuntary or, perhaps, the result of a conscious decision to ignore obvious signs. For years, I believed my family valued me for more than just the financial support I unknowingly provided them. Suddenly, the insistent vibration of my phone, tapping on the wooden table, interrupted my reverie. Looking at the screen, I recognized my mother's name. My stomach clenched, and with trembling hands, I decided to leave the message on voicemail, unable to face the jumble of emotions her voice evoked so soon. Barely a minute later, the notification blinked impatiently again. Against my instincts, I pressed play, and in a mixture of exasperation and reproach, the familiar voice said, "Sarah, please stop being so dramatic. Call me. You know that family is much more than just a financial balance sheet." Those words, as familiar as they were hurtful, echoed in my mind. The irony didn't escape me. For them, family ties seemed to have value only when they served to justify their own needs, while my emotions and sacrifices went unnoticed. With a decisive gesture, I deleted the message and put my phone away, determined not to give in to the repeated onslaught of guilt. During the following days, the calls came in relentlessly. First, Mom's insistence. Then Dad joined the fray, and to top it all off, Liana chimed in with sermons mixed with sarcastic pleas. None of those voices betrayed the slightest hint of remorse, but rather a growing irritation at the sudden absence of their financial support. Finally, after a particularly bitter phone call in which Liana accused me of being selfish and jealous, I decided to cut off all communication. That action brought me a fragile, unfamiliar peace that contrasted sharply with the lingering pain that seemed unwilling to dissipate. Seeking refuge in my work, I immersed myself in an ambitious project, the construction of an elegant medical office complex in Sacramento. Endless meetings, blueprint reviews, and client visits became my new distractions. Those tasks, which I once performed with ease, became a refuge from the harsh reality that awaited me each night. I extended my days by accepting trips and additional commitments, hoping to postpone the inevitable confrontation with loneliness and emotional emptiness. 3 weeks passed without my family contacting me directly. I began to believe, perhaps naively, that my decision to cut off communication would be accepted and that they could move on without me. However, deep down I knew that wounds don't heal so easily. On Friday afternoon, my phone lit up again with a text message that seemed to announce an imminent reunion. Family gathering tonight. Sarah, you must be there. My heart raced with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. Although I felt I no longer owed them anything, a faint hope of reconciliation compelled me to respond with a simple good. When I arrived at my parents' house, the scene seemed like something out of a distorted dream. Liam's imposing motorcycle and Liana's striking blue Kia were parked side by side, silent emblems of an old pressure that still weighed on me. With a churning stomach, I approached the front door, now as alien and unwelcoming as the facade of an unavoidable adversary. My mother greeted me with a forced smile, barely betraying a hint of irritation. "Sarah, I'm glad you decided to come," she announced coldly as she led me inside. In the living room, my Aunt Daisy sat in a corner, watching me with a mixture of sympathy and caution, as if she feared my arrival would reopen old wounds. The tension became palpable when my brothers joined the gathering. My father, clearing his throat, announced bluntly, "We called this meeting to clear things up. Sarah, your mother and I thought you would have understood our position by now. We were clearly wrong." With my fist clenched, I tried to reply, my voice trembling despite my effort to hold it back. "Come to your senses? After everything I've sacrificed, every mortgage payment, every tuition check, do you really think that justifies disregarding my own well-being?" My mother retorted dismissively, belittling my words. "Don't exaggerate. Your support was always your responsibility, being the eldest." Liana added mockingly, "If you weren't so busy saving the family, maybe you'd have a life of your own by now." Pain and humiliation overwhelmed me. With a trembling voice, I admitted through tears, "You're right. It was my mistake to believe I had a place here." Before I could process my own words, my father's voice cut off abruptly. "If you leave now, don't expect to be welcomed back." That statement was the breaking point. Heartbroken, I replied coldly, "I've never felt welcome." I left the house, and under the cold blanket of stars, tears traced burning trails down my cheeks. Each step toward my car seemed heavier than the last, revealing in a flash that my family had never truly valued me. I was just a resource, something expendable and utilitarian. Back in my apartment, I closed the door resolutely, vowing never to be hurt again. I sank into the darkness, where the silence became a protective refuge. However, I had barely found any solace when a soft knock on the door startled me. Peering through the peephole, I saw Aunt Daisy, her face etched with genuine concern. Without a word, she let me in, and in an instant, enveloped me in a comforting embrace. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling and heavy with emotion. "You deserve so much better." That warmth, combined with Daisy's comforting embrace, released years of pent-up pain and bitterness. After a long, silent moment, Daisy spoke again, her voice firm. "They may not admit it, but they're afraid to face their own mistakes. They're afraid of losing control." As I mentally reviewed each recurring payment, $800 for the mortgage, $600 for utilities, and other transfers disguised as family support, I realized that, despite the guilt they tried to instill in me, I had surrendered my life to an illusion of security that was never mine to live on. With a symbolic click, I decided to cancel all those financial obligations. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, so intense it took my breath away. For the first time in years, I stopped being a lifeline for a family that only saw me as a means to meet their needs. That decision, painful yet liberating, was etched into my soul, marking the beginning of a path toward self-worth and true autonomy. That dawn, as the light timidly filtered through the curtains, I understood that the time had come to break with old ties. I had spent the night on the sofa, overcome by exhaustion, while the Portland skyline was bathed in soft golden hues. However, the silence was abruptly broken by the insistent vibration of my phone. Seeing my mother's name flash on the screen, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. "Sarah, what have you done?" he asked, his voice thick with anger, omitting any greeting. The reason was clear. The bank had threatened to foreclose on the mortgage. With what little composure I could muster, I replied, "Mom, I paid off the mortgage willingly, but after what happened, I can no longer be the financial support you expect me to be." The conversation devolved into a whirlwind of accusations about lost respect. While my mother demanded recognition, I made it clear that respect had to be mutual. "You chose the path, and I've chosen mine." With a curt goodbye, I hung up, feeling how, despite the inner turmoil, a strange sense of empowerment was beginning to surface. During the following weeks, I began to rebuild my world. Work ceased to be merely a distraction and transformed into a source of genuine satisfaction. I finally booked that long-awaited trip to Italy, savoring the freedom to invest in myself, even as loneliness crept into my evenings, reminding me that certain family ties had been severed. However, the tranquility was shattered by a fateful return home. After an exhausting trip to Sacramento to oversee final inspections of a new medical complex, I arrived home Friday night, my body heavy but my mind filled with renewed hope. But as I approached my apartment, something caught my eye. A thick, hardened layer of foam covered my door frame, as if someone had deliberately sealed my entrance. My surprise turned to a mixture of panic and fury when I recognized, without a doubt, the perpetrator of this cruel act, Liam. My heart racing, I called building management. After a long wait in the hallway, a locksmith appeared and carefully removed the foam while muttering about the premeditated nature of the vandalism. His analysis seemed to confirm my worst suspicions. Someone wanted to prevent me from returning home, and his name was Liam. I quickly checked the security camera footage from the hallway. There, amidst shadows and awkward angles, Liam's figure was clearly visible, his cap pulled down and a sweatshirt partially obscuring his face. He was carrying out his sabotage with a malicious grin. The betrayal felt like a dagger to my soul, but in that instant, I decided it was time to act. With trembling hands and the footage in my possession, I called Aunt Daisy for advice. Her voice, soft but firm, made it clear that allowing this behavior would only encourage future abuse. "If you don't hold those who hurt you accountable, they'll never learn," he told me. Protecting them isn't compassion, it's empowerment, driven by that wisdom. The next morning I filed a police report, submitting as evidence the video that confirmed the sabotage was intentional. The family's reaction was swift. Voice messages and calls flooded in, labeling me a traitor and accusing me of disloyalty. However, behind that barrage of reproaches, I painfully glimpsed the acceptance that I could no longer remain under their control. Later, my father, his voice trembling, questioned me. "Sarah, what does it take to leave this behind?" $3,000. The exact cost of the repairs? I replied with a coldness that surprised even my own heart. The accusation of extortion was immediately leveled, but my words remained firm. "It's the consequence of Liam destroying my home. Either he pays the debt, or he will face legal repercussions." The next morning, a transfer of exactly $3,000 appeared in my account, labeled final payment. That money represented not only financial compensation, but also acknowledgement that my actions had had an impact on my independence that could not be underestimated. With the sabotage behind them, silence settled over my family. Days turned into weeks without calls, angry messages, or desperate pleas. At first, the silence offered me a respite, but it soon became a painful reminder of what I had lost. Rumors began to circulate. Aunt Days, in a late-night conversation, noticed that my mother was saying she had abandoned the family, that she had left them without support. That accusation, absurd and painful, echoed in every corner of my being. It was in that moment of deep reflection that I understood what had really happened. Years of sacrifice, given up vacations, and postponed dreams were being erased in an attempt to rewrite my story as the family villain. But I wasn't the same anymore. With determination, I sat down at my computer, and with each keystroke, I recounted my truth in detail in a Facebook post. I told you everything, from the monthly mortgage payments and the financial pressure to the IEM's blatant irresponsibility and the constant family lawsuits. Every word was a liberating cry from years of pent-up pain. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some expressed shock and empathy, horrified by the silent suffering I had endured. Others criticized my decision to make such intimate matters public. Shortly afterward, a voicemail from my mother crackled on my phone. "How dare you?" But that question, far from frightening me, reaffirmed my conviction. That episode, despite its cruelty, became the catalyst for a personal transformation. I had left submission behind and reclaimed my right to decide my own destiny. Standing in front of my newly repaired apartment door, I took a deep breath, feeling in each breath the promise of a future built on my own terms, free from constraints and the voices of others. Today, I look back and recognize that, amidst betrayal and pain, an inner strength was born that I never imagined I possessed. That struggle, as bitter as it was necessary, freed me to build an authentic life, where my voice and my dignity are my only guides. That day marked the beginning of a change that not only shook the foundations of my world but also ignited a flame of transformation within me. In the midst of a heated argument, my words became a mirror of my pain and my yearning for dignity. "You can't belittle me like this," I said, my voice wavering between anger and sadness as I tried to protect the courage I had built up over the years. At that moment, I understood that masks and deceptive appearances could conceal deep wounds. The accusations came thick and fast. After everything I had given, I was labeled selfish, and attempts were made to justify decisions that damaged not only my spirit but also the spirit of those around me. They told me my efforts were insignificant and that, by choosing to help those in need, I had betrayed a sacred bond. That night, the echo of their reproaches mingled with the silence, blurring my vision with tears, while a searing guilt coursed through me. In the midst of that emotional storm, Aunt Daisy's unexpected visit was a balm. Her face etched with worry, she appeared in the doorway, and without a word, embraced me with the warmth of someone who has always seen beyond appearances. "Sarah, what you shared changed many people's perspectives," she whispered tenderly, reminding me that sometimes the truth shines brightest when revealed without reservation. She explained that, for years, certain achievements and efforts had been ignored or even hidden, and that it was time to claim the recognition they deserved. 3 days later, a short, blunt message from Liana shattered my newfound calm. "Thank you so much. Now everyone is rejecting us. I hope you feel proud." As I read those words, I felt my relentless pursuit of approval slowly fading away. I had learned that external validation always comes with strings attached and sacrifices. With a mixture of serenity and conviction, I've put aside apologies for other people's decisions. It's time to take responsibility for every choice. Although my response went unanswered, every word I wrote strengthened my resolve. Time brought inevitable changes. While some family members faced financial hardship, forced into grueling jobs and grappling with long-postponed debts, I experienced a quiet rebirth. My career began to flourish, and with an unexpected promotion, I gained not only a corner office but also the financial independence I had so longed for. Every dollar that went into my account was tangible proof that deciding for myself wasn't selfishness, but an act of necessary courage. With that newfound freedom, I treated myself to a trip I had postponed for so long, 2 weeks in Italy. Standing on a balcony in Florence, I watched the sunset paint the horizon with warm hues, and in that instant, the burden of the past melted away. The breeze and the light reminded me that happiness could be genuine, and that obligations imposed by others had no place in my new reality. Back home, I joined a hiking group, and on those walks I discovered that weekends could be reclaimed, filled with friendship and personal rediscovery. On one of those hikes, I met Alex, whose smile and kind words acted as a balm in my healing process. Her quiet support filled a void that had long echoed in a dysfunctional family, reaffirming my right to receive unconditional love. The days passed with a renewed peace, until one cold November night, Aunt Daisy reappeared. Wearing her favorite sweater and carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee, she entered my home barely uttering a word, but her embrace said it all. "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. Through tears, she reminded me that, even though the past tried to make me doubt myself, the strength to have chosen myself was the greatest victory I could have achieved. We talked for hours, sharing memories, laughter, and confessions. Daisy taught me that true family isn't defined solely by blood, but by those who recognize and value our true selves. While the whispers of distant relatives painted a grim picture of my parents' circumstances, she working in a restaurant, exhaustion etched into every line of her face, and he enduring labors beyond what was healthy, I understood that, despite their flaws, I had found my path to freedom and authenticity. That Christmas Eve, instead of succumbing to resentment, I chose to celebrate friendship and independence. Close friends gathered to share warm moments, and amidst laughter and hugs, Aunt Daisy smiled knowingly, as if confirming that a full life was possible even after the worst betrayals. As I said my goodbyes and watched the city lights twinkle in Portland, I felt the pain, though persistent, transform into a scar from which I had learned to draw strength. In the end, the rejection and actions of those I once called family became the impetus I needed to be reborn. While they bequeathed what they considered their rightful possessions to others, I received the invaluable gift of choosing my own destiny. Now, standing amidst the freedom I have forged, I wonder, what would you have done in my place? Would you have sacrificed your happiness to maintain a draining bond, or would you have chosen to walk alone, even knowing the risk of losing them forever? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, to tell me how you would face the difficult choice between the pain of the past and the promise of a future shaped by your own will. Every experience is unique, and in dialogue, we find the strength to move forward, celebrating the truth and the value of being true to ourselves.